Thanks for being here tonight. I'm going to be telling you a story tonight about the search for one's true self from a perspective maybe you haven't heard before. So first of all, for those of you who don't know me, my name's Dara. I have a mental health counseling private practice in Colorado Springs. I call it the Bohemian Sanctuary. Now, about a year ago, I received an email from someone who, understandably, was interested in getting some therapy. And so there was nothing very unusual about the email itself. They said they had a problem that they'd been struggling with for as long as they could remember, and they thought I'd be a good person for them to talk to about it. So I need to stop for a second, because I need to tell you something. At least half of the clientele who I see through the Bohemian Sanctuary end up identifying as transgender. So what I mean by this is, there's a lot of different definitions about what it means to be transgender. What I'm talking about specifically are people who suffer from gender dysphoria, aka gender distress, for as long as they can remember. In other words, the gender they were assigned at birth does not match the gender that they feel themselves to be. So what that means is, anytime I'm contacted by somebody who wants to seek me out for counseling services, I have to make sure I do not assume their gender identity. For instance, this email I just told you about, this person who said they were struggling with an issue for their whole life, it doesn't matter if it was signed by Vinny or Rex or Brock. In my line of work as a gender therapist, no assumptions can be made about the true gender identity of the person who contacts me. So let me back up a second and tell you a little bit about when I first started seeing transgender clients. I started the Bohemian Sanctuary in 2008. And the way that came about was in 2006 is when I graduated from with my master's in community counseling. And after that, I worked at the Colorado Springs Pride Center for about a year and a half. And through that job, I made a lot of connections and friendships in the LGBT community. So therefore, when I was finally ready to open my private practice, word on the street was that I was pretty friendly and open to working with the transgender community. And this is something that maybe you're not surprised to hear is very much needed even in 2008 and presently in the Colorado Springs area. So I took this responsibility pretty seriously. So at first, luckily, the clients came in as a slow trickle because it took me a little bit of time to realize that it's one thing to be friendly and open to working with the transgender population, but you also have to be very aware and knowledgeable of all the complexities that are involved with transitioning from either male to female or female to male. So I had to be able to answer questions from clients such as questions about hormone replacement therapy, gender-affirming surgery, how do they legally change their name and gender marker, where are their support groups in town, where's a friendly place they can get laser hair surgery, what are their rights that are covered under the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act. This is just the beginning of all the questions that can come to you. So friendly and open is nice, but being more of an expert in this area is really what's required. So I had to up my game. I ended up doing a lot of research, a lot of training, and actually through the experiences of my transgender clients is where, honestly, I learned the most. So here we are 5 years later, and working with the transgender population is my niche. It's my area of expertise. But it's also become a real passion of mine. So since I myself am not transgender, a lot of people wonder, how come? Maybe you're wondering, Dara, how come? How come you're so passionate about working with the transgender community? And I say that's because when it comes down to it, transgender folks are in search of something that every single one of us is in search for. That's the search for one's true self. One of my favorite therapists, Carl Jung, he once said, it's a privilege of a lifetime to become who you truly are. And I believe that we can learn quite a few lessons from many of my transgender clients as to how to do this. So at this point, I want to go back to that email that I first told you about, the one that was signed with the guy's name. So I'm going to ask you for a few minutes to step into my shoes as a gender therapist. And you're sitting in your gender therapist chair, and you're looking across from you, and you have the writer of the email is sitting there on your therapist couch. And remember, you're not making any assumptions about their gender identity. They're wearing a beard, a Broncos jersey, and this look on their face like that of a kid who's just bursting to tell a secret. So you can tell they're really nervous. And so you do some gentle nudging, trying to get them to talk, but there's a lot of hand-wringing, a lot of sighing, and they're saying, I just don't know where to start. And so you say comforting things like, it's okay, take your time, so it relaxes them. That's the counselor voice. And so a few minutes later, you could just tell they're just beside themselves and you just really want to get it out. And so they start just rubbing their face like this. And then they froze, and this look of discovery came on their face, and they knew what to say. And so they look right up at you and say, this beard has got to go. And so you say, well, why is that? At this point, you're met with some silence, and it goes on for a while, and you can see their eyes fill up with tears, and even a couple tears fall, but you're a good patient gender therapist, and you wait, and you sit in the silence with them, and finally you can just see that they gather themselves up and just comes out, and they say, screw it, I have got to just get this out there. This beard has got to go because I am a woman. And in that moment, this is one of the things I think is so special about working with transgender clients, to be present for and to be trusted with such a moment of cathartic release. So I'm going to release you from your gender therapist duties now. So, you enjoyed that. Thank you. And I'm going to tell you about an article I saw on the internet, and it was called 10 Things That Transgender People Would Be Happy Never to Hear Again. And one of them was, you're so courageous to transition. So I was surprised because, of course, I've said that many times to many of my clients. And I was like, I'm such a bad gender therapist. But upon reading the counter response, they made a really important point. Of course, there's a great deal of courage that's required to move forward with transitioning, but more so it's out of necessity. So what I mean is the options are transition, go crazy, or die. And I really wish I was being dramatic when I said that, but this is what I see day in and day out in my office. So if there's one thing that I would like for you to leave with tonight to remember, it's this. There is mounting evidence that what causes gender dysphoria is biological. So what that means is this is a medical condition, and so therefore, like any other medical condition, it needs to be treated. And the way it's treated is for the person to transition from the gender they were assigned at birth, moving away from that and being able to move more towards the gender they truly feel themselves to be. And so with that said, that's why it's important that you understand that this is what happens with people who are transgender, because our society as a whole doesn't understand it yet. And it's expected. This is still in a lot of ways very new, but the more people hear about this, the more you can absorb of this knowledge, the more you can pass it on to other people. So that's definitely one of the objectives I hope to meet tonight. One thing I want you to understand is that somebody who transitions to their true gender identity not only has to go through the usual sort of hardships that one goes through when they're making a significant life change as they move towards their true self, they also have to endure from a lot of people a great deal of questions, of doubts. It can range anywhere from unkindness all the way up to physical violence. And yet, even though in the face of these risks, in the face of these challenges, they move forward anyway. And I think that's one of the lessons I know I've learned from them, is that regardless, they can no longer ignore the truth of the inner voice inside. So this client that we both got to know a little bit earlier, they realized that they could no longer ignore the truth of what their inner voice was telling them when one night they realized that they completely hated themselves. At this point, the client was 35 years old and felt like a fraud, felt like a liar. They were so tired of living in guy mode all the time that they had completely isolated themselves pretty much from all of society. And this is something where one night, a couple months before I met her, she was alone in her apartment and pretty much was contemplating suicide and said out loud to her apartment walls, "I guess I'm just going to die alone." And she was surprised to hear inside of her a voice, and it was actually pretty strong, and it said, no, not okay. You're going to have to do something about this. And she listened, and it was then that she realized she was going to have to transition. Even if it meant her family was never going to speak to her again, it was either transition, go crazy, or die. And so, like I said, I met her a couple of months after she had this epiphany. It's when she realized she did need help with moving to the next step of her transition. And so at this point, I'm going to fast forward a little bit through the transition process, even though people are usually really interested in hearing it. So feel free to contact me later if you'd like to know more. But basically, about a month later, by a month after I met her, she had shaved her beard, and she had come out to a couple of close friends that she reconnected with. By the end of December, which is about 3 months into her transition, she had come out to her supervisor, and she started coming into our sessions wearing really cute outfits. And so it felt like at this point, it was a good time to ask her the following question, which was, well, what's your name going to be? And she kind of laughed and said, "Oh, I've just been, finally you asked me. I've been waiting to tell you." She said, "I've known for a long time what my name's going to be. It's going to be Stephanie." And I said, "Well, it's nice to meet you, Stephanie." And she kind of went like this and like she was taken aback. And I asked her what happened. And she said, "Well, that's really the first time anyone has ever used my name with me. And I can't believe how good it feels." So this is something that I notice a lot of my transgender clients do, and it's another lesson that I think we all can take, is that every step of the journey towards their true self, they stop and they ask themselves, does this feel right? Such as when I used Stephanie's name with her during the session. It not only felt right, it felt unmistakably right. Another example of this is when I write a letter that they can give to their physician so that they can start hormone replacement therapy. And so this is generally a very exciting moment in time during our sessions, something we really work up to. And so in the letter, I addressed Stephanie by her female name throughout the entire letter, and I referred to her as she. And by the time she got to the end of the letter, she was just delighted. And she was going to frame it and give it to people who didn't really understand what she was going through, and to really show them how valid it was, what she was going through. And so does it feel right? Well, for her, that would be a big hell. Yeah, it feels right. So I try to remind my clients of these right-feeling moments whenever things start going wrong, such as when Stephanie, about 6 months into her transition, decided to come out to her family, and it did indeed not go well. She had a coworker who insisted on not referring to her as she, and instead decided to call her it, and even sometimes if no one was listening, she'd call her freak. She also was at one point asked out on a date, and she turned them down, even though she really wanted to say yes, because she was afraid of what they would do when they found out she was not biologically female. And so even though transitioning can feel really, really right, that doesn't mean that there aren't moments that are going to come up that feel really, really terrible. Becoming one's true self can be a very painful process, as I have definitely learned from them. But at the same time, the purpose of it is liberation. By the time we had gotten 9 months into counseling, Stephanie was living, quote unquote, full time as herself, and as she put it, no more guy mode. Instead, it was real mode. And so this is something that I work with all of my clients on, becoming your true self, not just those who are transgender. If you couldn't tell, it's the basis of my counseling philosophy. And so I envision this being a world where children are taught from a young age how to listen to their inner voice, and that there's adults who are taught how to find that inner voice if they've lost touch with it. Don't be surprised to hear I also wish this was a world where people who are transgender can be honest with themselves and with the people around them from as young of an age as possible about any questions or concerns they have about their gender identity. And so I know this is a world where there's a lot of education still needed, a lot of understanding that needs to still happen, which is why I've dedicated myself to being not only a therapist for people who are transgender, but also an ally and an advocate. So I know it may seem like I'm giving a gift to the transgender community by doing this, but it's really them who has given me the gift, because they've helped me discover one of the reasons I've been put on this earth, and that's brought me one step closer to my true self. And so I'm going to take a guess that many of you out there are on your path of discovering your true self, so hopefully you know now that you're in very good company.